President Trump is now hunting down ISIS in Africa, specifically in Nigeria, where the United States has yet again used lethal military power, this time ostensibly to protect Christians in the country of Nigeria, to make America safe for democracy, or I don't even know what the justification is this time. This does not have much prospect. In fact, I would go so far as to say it has no prospect for any kind of positive outcome, certainly nothing that's going to have anything to do with protecting Christians in Nigeria or with advancing democracy or American national security objectives, anything positive at all. We're going to get into some of the reasons why I make such a categorical statement, and we have nobody better to discuss this, somebody with a lot of experience in fighting with violent extremist groups, Matthew Hoh, who was senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Group, former State Department official, former combat Marine, and a strong friend of the show. Matt, welcome back.
Hi, Danny. Happy holidays. Belated Merry Christmas.
And an early New Year. We'll just add that in there too.
Right. There we go.
Grateful to have you on, and especially kind of in this in between here, the interregnum, I think some call it, of the holidays. But stuff doesn't stop happening, as we saw here with this Christmas. I don't know if you call it Christmas massacre or if you call it Christmas defense. I guess it depends on where you stand as to how you would view this. But let's just take a look at this. First of all, this is the Truth Social that Trump, where he announced what has happened here. And I want to read it in its entirety because I think it's really illuminating into where we are. Gary, if you can toss that one up there. He wrote, "Tonight, at my direction as Commander-in-Chief, the United States launched a powerful and deadly strike against ISIS terrorist scum in northwest Nigeria, who have been targeting and viciously killing primarily innocent Christians at levels not seen for many years, even centuries. I have previously warned these terrorists that if they did not stop slaughtering of Christians, there would be hell to pay, and tonight there was. The Department of War executed numerous perfect strikes as only the United States is capable of doing. Under my leadership, our country will not allow radical Islamic terrorists to prosper. May God bless our military, and Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists." That was one of the weirder parts of this, in which there will be many more at the slaughter of Christians continue. President Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. What do you make of that? I mean, let's just start with honestly, I want to start with the last part of that, where he says, "Merry Christmas to all, including dead terrorists." I mean, on Christmas Eve, or Christmas night, rather, that was kind of weird, even by Trump's standards.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a message that the Prince of Peace himself would agree with. Yeah, I mean, just the sadism that this administration continually displays, whether it comes from the president or his cabinet officials or through their actions, is just ongoing. It's nonstop. That's exactly who these people are. They are sadists and opportunists and con men. There's no genocide of white people of Christians occurring in Nigeria. There's a heck of a lot of killing occurring, but it's not a genocide by any means of the definition. And the opportunism to use this defense of Christians on Christmas Day, the whole thing just reeks, and it's abhorrent. And we just go along. I mean, I think everyone else is struck by this too. The fact that we have a president who just writes in that manner and speaks in that manner and capitalizes words like centuries, I mean, just like his whole way about him, it's reproachful, I think, to anyone with a conscience and any degree of concern for their fellow man to witness this administration.
And let's kind of look at some of the claims in there that we're going after ISIS, and that seems to be a big bugaboo. And quite frankly, Obama is kind of the one that really took the lead on this one when he sent U.S. troops back into Iraq in 2015. I think it was in June 2015 when ISIS started moving against Baghdad and against Damascus. Frankly, ironically, then we wanted to send our troops in there we can discuss why that might have been. But that's when we started talking about how ISIS was this big terrorist threat, and then ever since then, ISIS has always been used for everything. I mean, almost like Bush used the AUMF to justify anything he wanted to do during his 8 years in service. Now then, ISIS is always raised as the bugaboo, whether it was in Afghanistan, whether it was in Syria, Iraq, and now then we've expanded into Nigeria to use that as a statement. So let's take a look at that first of all. Do you see as the ISIS, and there is a genuine ISIS affiliate in Nigeria, that's not fake, but do you see that as a threat to the United States, first of all?
No, they're not a threat to the United States. Most of these groups have their origins in local conflict. They've been dispossessed they've been preyed upon. They are the inheritors of decades long or centuries long grievances. They're living with the result, say, of colonialism and the drawing of boundaries through tribal, religious, ethnic lands, that the divided resources, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many things to describe these groups and how they've come to be and who joins them that fall far short of this idea that these are maniacal terrorists with only evil in their hearts who are dreaming of 72 virgins in paradise. I mean, it's so far from that caricature. And we know this because there have been people who've studied it, and because we have data, and because, if you just apply a little bit of strategic empathy, maybe you understand. But the two things I look at, Danny, in terms of Africa are, one, that in the year before the creation of Africa Command in 2008 by the United States, the number of terrorist attacks throughout Africa numbered into dozens, and now years later, almost 2 decades later, you're looking at thousands upon thousands of terrorist attacks every year, right? I mean, where you had in 2008 a handful of groups that you could characterize as terrorists or militias or insurgents or whatnot, you now have literally hundreds of these groups throughout Africa. So the metastasization of this type of organization, of this fighting group, of this jihadism, however you want to describe it, you can trace that to the introduction of Africa Command almost 20 years ago, and the insertion of the United States into Africa through commandos, through drones, but most importantly, through the support of pretty awful governments throughout Africa, providing them with all types of support. And then this is borne out. And the second thing I always point to when we talk about Africa is that about 7 years ago, the United Nations did a study of these militia groups, these jihadist groups, again, whatever you want to call them, terrorist groups, whatever you want to call them. And it found that 3/4 of their membership was of people who had come to the organization because either a family member or a loved one had been killed by government or foreign forces, right? So the same things that you and I saw in Afghanistan and Iraq, where people were driven to the insurgency, driven to the resistance because, hey, there are foreigners here and they just killed my best friend. I mean, like that type of phenomena, that's what has been motivating and emboldening and growing these organizations throughout Africa for the last 2 decades.
And that's actually what I wanted to ask you, because there's some may claim, well, the reason why AFRICOM got bigger is because of these terrorist numbers and attacks were growing. And I wonder if you could, as much as you can with whatever the data has shown, talk about, was there a causality, i.e., did the rise in strikes cause the AFRICOM to come in, or was it the other way around? And can you compare that with what you saw in your time in Afghanistan? Because I know you and I used to talk a lot, especially back in the early days of the Afghan war, is that every time there was a rise in attacks, then we would have a commensurate rise in troops, and then another rise in attacks, and then another rise in troops, et cetera, all the way up until we had the surge of 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops, and we know how that worked out. How do you see that dynamic here in Africa?
It's very similar. I think the creation of AFRICOM was not tied to this idea of fighting terrorism. Certainly, there was platitudes about that. But certainly, say outside of the Horn of Africa, you really didn't see that type of concern. More it was to have a presence in Africa that the Bush administration believed to be essential due to the disposition of resources. You know, the need for rare earth minerals, metals, essential elements, etc., going forward, as well as for other things that are more mundane: tin, copper, coal, etc. I think that was more in the making of AFRICOM, and why it was such if people recall that time period, this idea of standing up AFRICOM was a big deal. And it was this idea of having this presence. You know, there'd be this commentary about how Africa Command is Africa is you know, they throw out all the different stats. You know, half of the world's young people live in Africa. You know, whatever the numbers were, to make it seem that it was just a dereliction of duty, a dereliction of responsibility of the world's sole superpower not to have a presence in Africa. And so I think that was more the genesis. And then as you brought in, not so much the foreign forces, but it was more so the support for these governments throughout Africa that were barbarous, cruel, despotic, you know, and providing them with training, with military aid, with you know, support if need be through the form of airstrikes, later drone strikes. You know, that's where you start to see the government's trying to gain control over these areas, and then through that heavy-handedness, there being this response, right? That as the government puts force on these local areas to try and control them, often they were autonomous or semi-autonomous areas where they're essentially left alone. But here's a chance for the central government to show its power, and to show the United States that it's in control of its spaces. You know, the local people fight back. And then you have the opportunity to arrive for organizations like Al Qaeda and then later the Islamic State to come in with their brand, and also pulling in money, resources, ability to train people, etc., because this was a space that they could fill, because these people who were now being pressured, subjugated by the local governments that backed by the world's sole superpower would accept help from anyone. And now, more than a generation on, you've had this culture essentially arise where the ideology, the belief system, the worldview of Al Qaeda and Islamic State is something that takes root because it's been there for so long, and because they keep getting proven right. When the first Al Qaeda people show up, the conversation is about, you know, the Crusades, and it's about the long history of conflict between the West and the elite, middle in the East, the need to protect our people, to protect our way of life, et cetera, et cetera. And then the government troops are showing up, and then the checkpoints come in, and then these government troops who are different than the local people start patting down your mom, your sister, your wives as they go through checkpoints. And then the drones start appearing, and then somebody, you know, gets killed by a drone, you know, and it just accelerates. And all of a sudden, these crazy people that were talking this thing about the need to band together under some form of flag, and maybe in the case of Al Qaeda, it's this radical Islam, you know, all of a sudden, those guys are starting to make sense. And that's the very same dynamic we saw in Afghanistan, and particularly in Pakistan, you know, say in Western Pakistan, where you always had the people who were going to be arguing against the outsiders, arguing that you have to join in their crusade, join their militia, et cetera, et cetera. And then now all of a sudden, you know, like in Pakistan's case, the central government puts 200,000 troops into your tribal areas. And then the checkpoints come. Right. And then again, your mom, your sister, your wife are getting patted down by a soldier from the Punjab, you know, and then the drones start appearing. And so, and then all of a sudden, that guy at the end of the village, he's starting to make some sense now. Right.
That's a
And
really
that
good point.
essentially is how you see the growth of the Pakistani Taliban, you know, from 2003 onwards. And it's very similar dynamic to what's occurring and has occurred in Africa. And again, not that there aren't true believers in these groups, not that there aren't people within Boko Haram or Islamic State of Sahel province, or Islamic State of the Lakes region, you know, there in Nigeria. Not that those people don't exist. It's just that the dynamics that have put into motion the reasons for people joining these groups that are, again, on top of decades long, generations long conflicts that have existed. I mean, in the case of Nigeria, one of the fundamental drivers of conflict in Nigeria is between different types of ranchers. Is
Yeah.
between,
I'm actually going to get
right,
to that in just
ranchers
a second.
and farmers. I mean, so now you're getting the Cain and Abel stuff.
Right,
I mean,
right,
yeah.
right. I guess it's not really funny, but that is painful. I want to get to that in just a second, but I want to get a running start in there first. I want to stick with this issue of ISIS because it seems like that we are not paying any attention at all to this dynamic that you literally just talked about through all the way, whether it was in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or now here in Africa over a long period of time. There's evidence that we literally know nothing here. So Trump had that Truth Social. Following that, you had Secretary of Defense. I'm not going to call him Secretary of War. He came out and with this X post, and he said the president was clear last month: the killing of innocent Christians in Nigeria and elsewhere must end. The Department of War is always ready. So ISIS found out tonight on Christmas. More to come. So he's given the implication here that, number one, this is not about the issues you just talked about, which we will touch on more in a second, but it's about ISIS and just about killing Christians, as though for some reason these ISIS guys down there just love to kill people, and especially Christians, and all they got to do is stop, and then we'll stop here. First of all, do you think that that is accurate, an assessment of the nature of the problem, and do they just want to kill Christians?
No, no, and no. It's not an accurate assessment of the situation. It's far more complicated than that. I have a feeling that the knowledge of this by the administration is incredibly weak. There are probably men and women at AFRICOM pulling their hair out if they haven't already just given up and just going along with it because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Just like we knew how many guys, Danny, with Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly Afghanistan, who understood that this is not going to work. This is and they either get out or they get beaten down and go along with it, right? I mean, that's probably the case in Africa Command. You see the reporting in the U.S. is so paltry on this. I don't think any of the major American media outlets has a presence in Western Africa. I didn't see any reporting today from USA Today or Wall Street Journal or the other things I was looking at that gave me any confidence that whoever's writing these articles knows anything about what's occurring there. I would encourage people are interested. Al Jazeera English has been they've been following the situation in West Africa for as long as I've been watching them, and they continually have stories on West Africa. They have a presence in West Africa, and so they've been to the site of where this strike happened. We don't even know how many strikes there were. It seems that there may have only been one missile fired, but we don't know. But Al Jazeera went to that place. I think it's in northwest Nigeria, and it seems
was
that the missile,
Sokoto State, I think it was called, up in the northwest corner.
And they went to the town, and it seems as if the missile landed in a field behind a school and didn't do anything other than scare a lot of people. And then they spoke to the residents of the town, and the residents of the town say, we haven't seen an armed group here in more than 2 years. So, as low as the commentary I've seen coming out of West Africa from various Nigerian experts on this, who have said this, if you want to strike the Islamic State, why you strike in northwest Nigeria? They're not really there. There are some groups
Gary,
there
if you can put that
might
map
be
up. If you can put the map up here, I want to point this out. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, if you can look real close, you'll see Sokoto. That's where the strike happened, upper left-hand corner. What you're seeing on the screen here is violent actions by various jihadist groups. One is Boko Haram in the green. One is called the Fulani ethnic militia, and then the gray is the Islamic State. First thing you see there is that there's not that much gray as compared to these other ones here. And by the way, most of the gray are rebranded from Boko Haram and some other groups here. But you see almost none of these strikes are in the area where we hit.
Right. And like, as I said, the residents there said they hadn't seen an armed group in more than 2 years. I mean, why did they attack there? Do they not have any knowledge of this? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Maybe that they just wanted to do a show. which I think is probably the answer to this, that this was just performance on Christmas Day. Donald Trump, the great protector of the Christian people, playing to his base. So fire off a missile. Yeah, that sounds good. Northwest Nigeria. Most people don't even know where it is on the map. I get, I mean, that type of just do something. And as we seeing the one reporting I've seen from the site says it hit a field behind a school where there have been no armed groups in years. Meanwhile, there is a tremendous amount of violence in Nigeria. It's going to be throughout the country, as that map just showed. Particularly in the lakes regions, but these various groups that have been, in conflict with the state, with other groups. Oftentimes, it is divided along regional or local lines, and the reality is that it's a situation that foreign intervention is not going to solve.
President
It's only
Donald
going to
Trump
make the
used
situation worse.
And Gary, if you can bring up that full screen on the attacks of the rebranded groups, a lot of these some groups that have been fighting. And this has been going on in this particular iteration. You talk about Al Jazeera. This is where I got this from here. This has been going on in this particular iteration since at least 2009. And you see that the armed groups in Africa's most populous country, including at least 2 affiliated with ISIL, an offshoot of the Boko Haram, i.e. they just rebranded for whatever domestic reasons, armed group in the West African province, Northwest, and the lesser-known ISIL affiliate Sahel province, known locally as Lukurawa, whatever. It's local people. You can say it's ISIS or ISIL, depending on how you want to talk about it, et cetera, but it's local issues that are going on. It's what's happening on the ground. It doesn't have anything to do with what was going on in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Syria or any of those other things. We love to talk about it like that, but that's not the case. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what this really is.
Right. I mean, and you see the way the Nigerian government speaks about these groups in the Northwest, the Zakarawa group and others, they refer to them as bandits. And it is more of a situation where you've had this area that has been ruined by war, that has been unstable, where you've had issues, again, whether it's because of borders set by colonial powers, whether it's because of climate change, whether it's because of just actions by corrupt governments at local and national levels, whether it's the lack of resources and the fighting over. I mean, on and on. You have this reality where there is no control by any type of state authorities in these areas. And so you've had these groups that, again, as the Nigerian government calls them, bandits, that have been essentially roving and controlling and, subjugating the local populations. And then, of course, the local populations will stand up groups, and these groups will then eventually get to a point where they are powerful enough to start preying on the local populations. And I think the Laka Rawa, if I'm pronouncing that right, from what I've been reading, it came from that type of circumstance where they were stood up to try and gain control, and then that success led them to exert their own control over the area. I mean, it's just a messy, complicated situation that foreign intervention is only going to make worse, because, it's bad enough these people of these areas are being attacked and preyed upon by people from their areas, from their regions, local people. It's worse when it's the government coming from outside to come in and try and maintain in the same type of thing, the same desire to subjugate. But then it's really bad when you have foreign powers coming in, because that then, of course, plays right into the hands of those who are using the Islamic State brand for their purposes. And again, I don't want to diminish.
And in fact, Gary, if you can bring up that other one here about the tribal issues, because you mentioned this a minute ago, and this is even more of it. Number one, this has been going on for a long time. For more than a decade, Boko Haram and other armed groups have clashed in the Northeast, forcing millions of people from their homes. Since Tinubu took power over 2 years ago, pledging stronger security, more than 10,000 people have been killed there. In the center, there are increasing attacks on predominantly Christian farming communities. by herders of the rival Fulani pastoral ethnic group, which is predominantly Muslim. The attacks there are mostly over access to water and pasture. From several other reporting that I've seen, Matt, it said that there are some that are specifically ethnic killing. I think it's in the hundreds who have been killing people just because they're Christians. And there's unfortunately an equal, in some cases, larger number that are killing people because they're Muslim. But the majority of these kids, and you saw 10,000 just in this one area here alone, is because of local tribal farming and water issues.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the Fulani group is the most violent. That they are the ones that are uh, the largest killers, I guess to say. That they are the most dangerous. You want to try and apply some metric to them, or create some type of hierarchy. And I don't think you'll see conversation about that get to that point in the United States, in the media, from our members of Congress, certainly not from the White House, because now it's taken away from this idea that we're just simply there to fight the Islamic State. I mean, Islamic State, replaced Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda, of course, replaced the communists, right, as the great boogeyman. There's an attempt, I think, to with Venezuela for the United States to try and assert narco terrorists, drug dealers as the boogeyman we should all be worried about. But the Islamic State, even more than Al Qaeda, because it's got the word Islam in it, is such a great fear mongering semantic utilized in the U.S. And that's why, as you were saying, Danny, this idea that a lot of these groups have rebranded. A lot of these groups have taken that moniker because they know it gets them the attention. I mean, they're also plugged into a network, and there is some aspect of getting resources or support or money, maybe that way. But we saw that with ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan. The Islamic State is in Afghanistan. The origin story of that is that they were essentially disaffected Pakistani Taliban. There's this good story about how they were brought into Afghanistan by the Afghan intelligence service, the NDS, to try and cause problems within the Afghan Taliban themselves. And then when they weren't having that result, and the NDS dropped them, the Pakistani Taliban that were inside of Afghanistan rebranded it as ISIS-K. And then they got a heck of a lot of attention, including to the point where U.S. warplanes are dropping bombs in support, essentially, of the Afghan Taliban, as the Afghan Taliban are fighting ISIS-K in places like Nangarhar and Kunar and things like that, right? I mean, so the madness, I bring all that up just to kind of get people thinking about the madness of all this and where is this going to go? And, is it possible that, this continues in Nigeria, we get involved? I don't think anyone thinks we're going to put troops on the ground there or anything like that, but that we'll be doing some form of airstrike in support of Boko Haram against an offshoot that's labeled as the Islamic State, when neither of them are of any interest to the United States, and certainly neither of them should be supported by the United States. But because one is labeled Islamic State, we deem it's in our interest to attack them, even as we're supporting, again, somebody like Boko Haram or maybe Fulani or any of the other hundreds of groups. And it's important to note that there has been a foreign presence in West Africa, for centuries, of course, but in this, say, global war on terror, there has been this presence, and look at what it's got. Look at what has wrought. Whether it was the French presence, north of Nigeria, whether it was the intervention, the war in Libya, that a lot of this could be traced to in terms of the instability that the war in Libya brought and what that unleashed throughout Africa, including tons and tons of weapons moving out of Libya into other parts of Africa. But, now you saw in places, say, where the French have been ejected from in the last 4 or 5 years, the Russians have filled that. And in a country like Mali, which is getting support from Russia in fighting their own versions of all these groups, you see that the Mali capital is besieged. That these jihadist groups control the eastern entrances to Mali's capital, and that there's massive fuel shortages and things like that. So you have this throughout Western Africa. And again, I can't make this point enough. The idea of a foreign power coming in and dropping bombs it's not going to make it any better. It's actually going to make it
Right.
worse.
And that's actually something I want to delve into just a little bit here. This issue that what the president said and what Hegseth said in his ex post, more to come, and if they don't stop killing Christians, then we're going to keep going.
Right.
Do you see any prospects based on your experience with a number of different violent groups over the last number of years and on different continents even? Do you see any prospect that they would say, "Oh, snap, that's a lot of firepower. I would rather not have those bombs fall on me, so let me not kill any more Christians"? Or do you? And what I fear is that they may say, "Oh, okay, I see how you're going to be playing here. I'm going to now retaliate against more Christians." Do you see that as a risk?
I think for the leaders of this group, they're excited at the notion of the United States coming in. They're not afraid of the United States. They feel that they are part of a lineage that has defeated the United States, whether it was in Afghanistan, whether it forced the United States to flee from the Red Sea. They feel that they are part of regional armies, Islamic armies, armies of the people. However, again, when you want to describe this, that they have that they are the next in line to fight the United States, and so they have an obligation to do this. They have a desire to do this. Certainly, again, when you the attention on them, there's a possibility that they will get more recruits, that people from around the world may come to support them, that there are very wealthy people throughout the Gulf monarchies who may be, setting up payments now to send to these groups in Nigeria because the United States may be coming in. I mean, we've known for a very long time that the greatest source of income for these various jihadist groups comes from the Gulf monarchies, and that hasn't stopped, right? I mean, so if this is the new battleground, if this is where this cosmic battle is, this historical battle, this crusade is going to be fought in Western Africa, then the resources will shift there. And those groups that are in Nigeria or Mali or any of these places are more than happy to accept that. You then have the idea that, saying earlier, that if we know that 3/4 of the membership of these militia groups throughout Africa have come into these organizations because of again, death of a family, death of a loved one, maybe death of a neighbor, by the actions of a government or a foreign government. Well, this is just a recruiting bonanza, that's they're just waiting for. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let the United States come in and bomb and kill civilians, and then we'll just sit back and wait for the recruits to come in. Make sure we dust out those cases of extra AK-47s and RPGs we have, because once the United States starts killing civilians, we're going to have a lot more people coming in, because again, our actions are proving them right. So those who are right, yeah.
Yeah, now I want to look now, but put on your military hat here. You mentioned something a second ago, I think unfortunately is relevant here, and I want you to see or assess what ramifications there could be in this issue that we've just now opened up, this new can of worms. And that is, you talked about the issue against the Houthis in the Red Sea. We stormed in there, and you may recall this big boisterous claim by the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, about how we were going to be relentless and we were never going to stop until the Red Sea was open. And those Houthis, they better just figure it out, or they'll just keep dying until until the thing is opened up. And then after about a month or so of where we spent over $1 billion, didn't stop anything, and we said, oh, snap again. I see all this weapons that we've been expending here. We've lost a bunch of Predator drones, these multi-million-dollar aircraft. We can't seem to protect those. Let's just stop and move on and claim victory and move on here.
Right.
Do you see any military attainable objective in Nigeria that we're doing here, or that we can do, that we can say, all right, we will protect the Christians inside of Nigeria by these airstrikes, and by A, B, and C, that will result in a lessening or a safety for the Christians? Do you see an attainable military objective here?
No, I don't think so, because you have such a one, again, the idea of a foreign force doing that is just not likely, and the results of that would be as problematic and as disastrous as any other occupation we've seen in the last decades. I guess the planners at AFRICOM and in the Pentagon would say, well, the idea is to strengthen the central government in Nigeria and give them the tools and resources and support they need to take back this land, take back this territory from these groups, impose some type of order, and then pass on that order and control to local people. The problem being is the Nigerian government is so corrupt. It's so fractured itself in many ways. Its history with the local people is horrible and horrendous. The local people don't want anything to do with the central government. They view the central government just as much as outsiders as they view Americans or French or Russians or whoever. So you have this reality where no amount of force that you're going to put into the area is going to do anything other than create more resistance and then more opportunities for the groups that are best resourced to provide support to that resistance, which in this case are these jihadist groups. So there really is not a military solution here. And the ugly reality, as I see, is you just have to let it go and let it come to a natural pass, not provide support either way, and then over the years. An amelioration will take place where you may have started off with an Islamic State in northwest or northeast Nigeria, but over the years that mitigates itself, or that So this idea that the military force is just going to create more wars, it's going to create more.
And what do you think, Matt? I know you studied a lot about religion, period, just across the board. What do you think about the concept that the United States is saying, okay, even though there has been a nearly equal number of Christians and Muslims killed as a product of this thing going back since 2009, we're just going to say, we want you to stop killing the Christians. I guess if you keep killing the Muslims, that's cool. We don't really care about that. But we want this to stop. How does that play in the country of Nigeria?
Well, the reports I've read coming out is the frustration of Nigerians who are saying, you don't get it. You just don't understand it. It's way more complicated than that. This is not a question of Christians being persecuted. This is a question of entire communities being slaughtered by these groups that don't care whether they're Christian or they're Muslim. I mean, for these Islamic State groups, they oftentimes will view the other Muslims who do not agree with them as worse than being Christians, worse than being Jews, worse than being Buddhists or whatever, that these are the takfirs, right? These are essentially apostates. These are people who are heretical in their own faith. But the scale of the killing is constant throughout the country, and there is not a specific drive to only kill one sect or to kill one group or to, this is ultimately very fair in the scale of the killing, to be, glib. But I think this gives the Trump administration a way out, though, Danny, right? Because if you're saying you're doing this to stop something that's not occurring, right? This white genocide, and nobody is saying this. I keep saying white. And the reason why I keep saying white is because I know that the Trump administration believes that most of its base, when they say Christians, they believe that there are white Christians in Nigeria who are being killed by Black Africans, Black Muslims. And so I'm tripping myself up here, getting into the mindset of the White House on this, because I guarantee that is what they're saying. Is they're saying most of our supporters, those who are most appreciative of what we'll be doing here defending Christians, are believe that they are white Christians.
And I'm sorry, this is not directly related to what you're saying, but it is a painful point to me. I wonder where all the outrage was from the White House when it was the Christian Palestinians who were being killed by the Israelis. Right. Maybe you don't want to care about the Arabs that were killed, the Palestinian Arabs or the Muslims, but there were tens of thousands of Christians, fellow believers, in the inside of the Gaza Strip that no one seemed to care about, either Trump or the White House or even other white Christians. But I digress a little bit. That's just kind of a poignant part. If we care about Christians, it should not matter anything about their skin color or anything else or their ethnicity. It should only matter about the religious, but it doesn't.
Right. And the point being is that if there is no genocide of the Christians occurring, that makes it very easy for the Trump administration to walk away from this, right? And it makes it very easy for them to, as you said earlier, declare victory and go home. See, oh, look, we did. We got involved. We showed them what we went in there with guns a-blazing, whatever Donald Trump said.
Yeah.
And we showed them who's boss, and they backed off. And now there have been no reports of this genocide against Christians in the last week since we did this. There wasn't reports of the genocide against Christians before that, but that doesn't matter to these people, you know. Right. So they do have an out on this because they are making this about something that doesn't exist. Now the scale and the scope of the killing will continue, and like we've been saying throughout this episode, likely increase if the United States gets involved.
Well, and in the remainder of the time we hear, I want to take from that point and pivot to something that's a bigger. The issue in Nigeria is just starting, and although I would love it if they took that easy out, which would make it weird why you started in the first place, but we'll leave that one for at the moment. But that illustrates a bigger issue here, and I want to talk about that in the remainder of the time we have here, and that is the use of force by this current administration. This is just a screenshot here I put together of a number of different sources here. The Department of Defense itself is doing a 2025 year in review. I didn't put anything up other than the screenshot of that because it just brags about everything that they've done. Doesn't have any, any kind of baseline of basic views about what's actually happened. It's just cheerleading, etc. But in these other screenshots that I have layered on top of that, you see that first of all, you have a lot of domestic use of force. This is all in the 11 years so far by the Trump administration since they were inaugurated. And you see there's been federal troops, that has been sent to cities such as LA, DC, Memphis, Portland, Chicago, and New Orleans. Others are threatened in the coming year, maybe in New York and a handful of others. Then you have troops at the southern border. You have issues of posse comitatus, just violate the law, etc. It seems that we're making the use of military force more and more normal inside of the United States. Again, 1 year into 4. But then internationally, the so-called peace president he brags upon himself relentlessly that he solved 8 wars, which of course is farcical because he hasn't solved anything. He's talked to some people, and some conflicts temporarily seated. Others haven't even come close. Others reject and repudiate any suggestion that he brought the war to an end or even the conflict. But we'll leave that aside for the moment. What he has done is he has launched strikes in Syria, in Iran, in Iraq, in Yemen. There's some assassination complex in Iraq, Yemen, the Red Sea, the Caribbean Sea, the Pacific Ocean, and now in Nigeria. Those are things that have been used by this administration since they came in. There has been no authorization from Congress for any of this. There's been no congressional declaration of war. There's been no congressional use where it's the Congress that's supposed to set this up. And of course, it's mocked relentlessly that, yeah, well, I know that's what the law says. I know that's what the Constitution says, but we haven't done it in the last 3 or 4 decades. So basically, it's no longer a law. So just move on from there. Now that we still see, though, there's potential use in Venezuela. There's always the risk that this thing could explode in Russia between Ukraine, and we could get sucked into that, or the ever-present possibility and threats and warnings that we may be eventually fighting China over the issue of Taiwan. Trump has threatened Mexico, Greenland, Panama, etc. Then there's probably others I could put on that list. But man, that is a lot of stuff for 11 months of 1 out of 4 years of President Trump's term. What does this tell you about the militarization of the United States?
Oh, it's gotta. If it had its own stock, right, you'd be a buy with high confidence. As you just laid out there, the potential next places, none of them are insignificant. None of them are minor. I mean, all of this would be dramatic, and the consequences of any one of those, what in the sense of what they could do. Venezuela, the idea that it could spread throughout the Caribbean. I mean, it's got spread throughout the Western Hemisphere, South America, Central America, through instability, right? I mean, the amount of migrants that would I mean, like, just, Russia, China. I mean, those are all self-explanatory. But even like this idea of conflict over Greenland, what it would do in terms of shaking the high degrees of cooperation and particularly in commerce between the U.S. and Europe. I mean, the consequences of this stuff it's massive. And the fact that they are so happily bounding into it, right? That they're so positive about it and that they feel like they are really going to accomplish something here other than just starting wars. But I think that's the metric they're going by, Danny. I don't think that there's any idea for them about actually achieving results other than being able to brag about the wars that they're in.
Well, that was my next question. Are we safer today than we were on January 19th of this year?
No, we're in the same place. I mean, certainly, I think this idea that the Russia-Ukraine war, at least there's been negotiations. I know Zelensky's coming. Is going to meet with Trump Sunday, and he says it's 90% there, and the Russians are, at least the Russians haven't pulled out of it. So at least with that, there's some degree of negotiations going on, but we've still seen escalation around the edges of it. That is very concerning. And then any of the other types of conflicts that were listed, whether it's the threats of them, this idea we're going to send troops into Mexico, or that we're militarily going to take back the Panama Canal. I mean, the consequences of all that, my God, what that could bring about in terms of havoc, just on a very, just essentially what that could do to the American economy, say. Not even to the poor people who would be ruined by it, but by the American economy. So this idea that we're somehow safer is absolutely not the case. We are in the same precarious position where our military is overextended, while despite the this administration says that they want to rebuild or reimagine or recenter or consolidate the American empire into something more manageable and go more into an idea of spheres of influence within a multipolar world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can read all that in the Trump national security strategy. And then when you pick your head up from the paper and look around and see what's going on, it doesn't seem like they're going to be following that. I mean, even this idea of giving security guarantees to Ukraine, how does that fall in any way in line with what was in that national security strategy that we read?
Yeah.
So there is, an attempt, I think, for the Trump administration to create some type of method to their madness. And we saw that through the NSS. But the reality is that the people in power, the people in charge they're different than the previous administration, but in terms of their worldview, in terms of their willingness to use U.S. military force to achieve what they think is essential or necessary, they're no different. And so, no, we're absolutely not safer. We could have been through a host of things, including through arms control. I mean, it's been how much? 3 months now since the Russians offered to extend New START, and the United States has not done anything about that. You
can argue we have done something about it, though not helpful. So instead of talking about that, what we have talked about is a Golden Dome air defense system that's going to be allegedly impervious to all the things that the Russians are building. And now then we have this Golden Navy that we talked about the other day that's allegedly going to have all these new, battleships, weirdly called, that it's going to be going on there. Whether any of those come to pass, I can't say, but in line with that national security strategy, you saw this Golden Dome situation with the Golden Navy, this expansion that's going on, all this, et cetera. Does this create, and this is what the claim is, peace through strength? This is what we're going to get because of all these things, that we're going to have peace with China and Russia. Is that going to happen?
No, I mean, I think many people recall, what Tacitus reported about the Roman Empire. They create a desert and declare it peace. This idea that you're going to make peace through annihilation of your enemies. You're going to make peace by destroying and laying waste so that nothing else can occur. That's the logical conclusion of these ideas of the Golden Dome, the Golden Navy, no arms control, maintaining U.S. forces around the world, right, as well as just the rhetoric. Switching the name from Department of Defense to Department of War, gleefully posting videos every week, every third day, however often it is, of people being murdered on the ocean. I mean, the joy in the killing, again, to get back to it, the sadists that we have in power here, if you have men and women like this, I'm both, I'm glad you brought up the domestic side as well. On both the international and the domestic side, the sadists that are in control, where is that going to lead us to? I mean, you have a government composed of Rubios and Hegseths and Millers and Bondis and Gnomes and Becents. Where do you think that's going to go? And so, yeah, this idea that somehow we're going to achieve peace through strength by spending $1 trillion on the Pentagon and the Department of Energy and the State Department every year, and that's somehow going to lead us to a degree of deterrence, and that deterrence will then cause will cause a quieting in hostility that will lead to some form of peace through negotiations or
well, and Matt, I wonder if
it doesn't work that way.
I wonder if you could give us an idea, following that lead there, how is this viewed on the other side? Because the implication is that the calculation by all of this strength should be that other sides go, oh snap, look at all that power, we better just like go silent on them and not do anything. Is that what generally happens?
No, the opposite happens. They say we can't trust them. This is making us less safe. There's a violation of our security, and we need to take measures to protect ourselves, as well as to make it so that the United States isn't so strong that they feel they can get away with a first strike, or that they can launch a war and win. I mean, and this is the whole concepts of arms control and various other measures. This idea to have some type of parity, not to have one side be so much stronger or one side be able to protect itself from the other side, so that that one side is willing to carry out a first strike. I mean, this goes back decades now in terms of why we are in this place. And if you go back, though, to 2001, when the Bush administration pulls out the anti-ballistic missile treaty, this is what everybody was saying was going to happen. This arms race that we're in now, all these new Russian nuclear weapon systems, or the fact that the Chinese are approaching 1,000 nuclear warheads or whatever the number, and they're going to double that in the next 10 years or whatever those numbers are, that was all predicted back in 2001. Joe Biden, when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee back in 2001, discussing the anti-ballistic missile treaty, says this. He says that, if we pull out of the ABM treaty, it's just not going to affect the Russians, but the Chinese are going to double and triple their nuclear forces. We know this is going to happen. That's what Joe Biden said in 2001. And what happened? They did exactly that. The same thing, too, when Barack Obama agrees to New START, but he makes that deal with Senator John Kyle to modernize American nuclear forces. And originally that was less than $1 trillion. And now I think it's approaching $3 trillion, this modernization effort of American forces. The Russian response is, if you do this, we will have to build new weapons ourselves. And that's essentially what the Russians did. So all these nuclear wonder weapons that Vladimir Putin and Russia have rolled out in the last few years, that all is a consequence of George W. Bush's departure for, abrogation of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, and Barack Obama's modernization of our nuclear forces. That results in all these Russian weapons, including like this Poseidon Trident, this Poseidon nuclear torpedo with a 50 megaton warhead that will, create a tsunami that will wash everyone, away east of the Appalachians or whatever it's going to do. I mean? These are serious weapons. These are serious concerns. And so then you get into this escalation, right? You go up the escalation ladder. And as one side does something, the other side does something in return, back and forth. I mean, I saw this on a much more tactical level in Iraq. I was a combat engineer, and so I did a lot of counter improvised explosive device work. And our estimate was that within 30 to 60 days of us bringing out a new technology, a new piece of kit, new equipment, whatever, to defeat Iraqi improvised explosive devices, roadside bombs, essentially, that within 30 to 60 days, the resistance, the Iraqi insurgency had countered that. And so you just get in this competition. And so then we create a counter to their counter. And they would counter our counter to their, right? I mean, that's the way it worked, And the same thing that applies to whether you're talking about essentially a 155 shell that's on the side of the road, or to Trident 2 missiles on
Yeah.
our nuclear subs that now have super fuses on them.
Uh, yeah. That's it. We talk about motion, counter motion, counteraction, et cetera, and then counter. It's been going on all throughout the Russia-Ukraine war. It's been going on now, as you said, even at the strategic level, even involving us. Listen, in the last few minutes we got here, I want to address one other aspect of this, which I think is more important than many believe, and some don't think it's important at all. But I'd like your view on the moral issue or the legal issue that's involved here, because with these, you mentioned these boat strikes in both the Caribbean and the Pacific seas that we've been doing against alleged narco boats, some of which probably were, many which weren't. But even those that were, there is no law that exists, either an international law or American law, that allows you to just execute someone who's suspected of running drugs. You just can't do that, and yet we do it. There was nothing that legally allowed us to go and attack Iran. I actually left that off the list earlier, I think. We attacked Iran there. There was nothing that legally allowed us to go after these people in Nigeria. There's nothing at all. There is no legality whatsoever to allow us to even contemplate overturning the election and the regime in Venezuela. And yet we're apparently poised to do that very thing here. All around here, Matt, you see the United States going further and further away from any even pretending to follow international law, the rules-based order that we used to pray to defend since the end of World War II, or just the morality of anything other than peace through strength. Do you see that as a bigger issue, or is it just that, hey, you can say whatever you want, but the bottom line, it's always just been who's got the most power? How do you see that?
I think, unfortunately, the reality of international affairs has been that way. Go back to Thucydides, right? The strong do as they wish, the weak suffer as they must. This idea that when you have men and women in power who are guided by their own self-interests, in which we find in countries around the world, not just the United States, but in particular in this country, and in particularly when you have a clique in power like we have, that, for the third time, I'll call them what they are, sadists. You have this real understanding that we can do as we want. As long as we have the power, who is going to stop us? And that occurs, not just internationally, but domestically. Who's going to stop us from carrying out warrantless raids, violating civil liberties, violating the American Constitution? Who's going to stop us from that? The local police step out of the way. And Trump, who has talked about his admiration for Andrew Jackson, when Andrew Jackson was president and the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling against him, President Jackson said something along the lines of, "I'm waiting for the Chief Justice to march over here with his army to enforce it." So that's the reality that we're dealing with here, because there are no principles attached to any of their actions.
But is there a consequence to that? Meaning, can we just ignore it at our whim and just talk about morality when it suits us, but then not doing it when it doesn't, and who cares?
Well, there is a great consequence. I think we have morality exists in our society because it's not simply a question of right or wrong, or having empathy for someone else and treating someone as they wish to be treated. There are larger social evolutionary reasons for us to have adopted morality, whether it comes through our religion or just comes through our ethics, because without that form of order, without that form of discipline, you are facing chaos. And when you have a perverseness like you have within our government, again, these sadists in power who believe they are acting morally in their own minds and their own righteousness, well, the consequences of that are going to accumulate in the blowback that it's going to engender. Essentially, at some point, the United States is going to try and punch someone in the nose, and it's going to end up in a fight that it can't get out of, and a fight that proves disastrous. And so you can see how these men and women in power, because they have no respect for any other structure other than what they believe in themselves. And they have no desire to achieve anything other than their self-interest. They believe that their power, as Senator Fulbright, said about these types of people, they mistake power for virtue. So when they do something like, say, in Venezuela, when they seize an oil tanker with Chinese oil on it, they believe they are fully right. The Americans who do this believe that they are fully right and that they're righteous. And how could there be consequences for such a thing? And eventually there will be. At some point, the world's strongest power in the world, is going to say enough. China's going to say enough. You cannot steal our oil, and there's going to be some form of consequence. And other nations will then drift towards China to align themselves, because China then is operating, if you don't want to call it morality, you can call it principle, at least. There's some type of structure to their decision making that people can trust, that people can follow. With the Americans, there is no structure. It's an incredibly dangerous country to be around, because we act on our whims, and our whims are fully invested with our righteousness. So it's incredibly difficult and dangerous to be America's ally right now, our friend. I mean, throw out another quote, Kissinger, dangerous to be America's enemy, deadly to be America's friend, and so, the great concern I have, aside from, just your regular structure of morality, the idea of what's being done here is wrong. It's unconstitutional. It's immoral. It's all that, is that where it puts us in terms among other nations. And we're in this very precarious position that we're in, where we're already overextended. We have no manufacturing or industrial capacity to truly support ourselves, right? I mean, and that, whether that's from resources to actually getting something out a factory door, we have irritated, annoyed, upset our allies, and we keep picking fights around the world. Like, as you said, we probably could have added more nations to the potential next list, and the people that we do tend to bend over for are either genocide heirs like Benjamin Netanyahu, or corrupt and cruel monarchs like MBS or MBZ. So where does that lead us? And who does that put us among? And what does that leave it? Where are we then in terms of our vulnerabilities to other nations, not just militarily, but politically and economically, and even culturally, which I would argue culturally, that's been the most important line of effort for the American empire over the last 7 or 8 decades. But even I think you'll see a diminishment in the American cultural superiority around the world as people turn their backs on the Americans. And so it's just,
Matt, I've seen, unfortunately, all too. I would love to say it's just a clique. It's just the people who are at the top right now who are doing all these immoral and unethical things. But unfortunately, I see a lot around the country, and not even just individuals, but also on like major media that cheer this on and say, yeah, do it. Who cares if it's legal? But Lindsey Graham has many times said, we've shown a couple of times here, he's like, I mean, I know what the 1973 War Powers Act says, but we violated 130 times. So who cares if there's 131? Right. Meaning it no longer matters. And then the same thing about the Constitution, about the war-making powers only in the legislature. They say, well, I mean, we've only actually declared war, like 2 or 3 times in our life. Obviously, that's not really a thing. That's just what they said back then. So just ignore that. So the rule of law is going away. You talked just about literally stealing the oil from another country, stealing the ship. According to Trump, he's going to take that, whatever. Nobody is wanting to trust this. And there's too many in America that cheer that on. And I think that's just going to be part of the degradation. Once you see the people at the top, it's going to be mirrored by those increasingly people just in the country. So I just see this going in a bad direction that it could definitely not have a good ending. And I worry a lot about that.
Yeah, no, and it should worry all of us. I mean, we're already, by any metric, a nation that's in decline, an empire that's in decline. Again, just for the reasons we rattled off, we can rattle off other reasons, or our education system, our own investments, how financialization, has just sucked the life out of this country. I mean, if people don't understand financialization, I think it's the idea that most people can understand it this way. The idea that now when you go into a store, they give you 2 different prices one for cash, one for credit. Anyone doing work on your house wants a check rather than you paying by card because they lose so much in those fees, right? That's financialization, this idea that we don't do anything, we just take, that we own things. And because of our ownership, because of the rents that we have, we, which, go back to Adam Smith and see how he felt about rents, but this idea that we are a country that is essentially parasitic. It's vampiric. We extract, we don't create anything. And at some point, that base that we have that is essentially hollow will be tested, and we won't be able to make, we won't be able to meet whatever demand is being presented upon us. We are essentially a nation everyone around the world understands as just surviving still upon the ruined remains of World War II. That following World War II, when the entire industrial world was astride, besides us and Australia and Canada, about 10 million people between those two countries at that point, but essentially the United States was the only industrialized country left in the world. We dictated everything. We wrote the world's monetary and financial order for our benefit. And now all these years later, we still, we're blaming others for our own problems. Even though we're the ones who set the system up. We're blaming others for our problems, and people understand that. And again, this aspects of trust, this view of the American government as at best hypocritical. But the only ones around the world who are cheering on a return of the Democrats would be the Europeans, because they feel that the Democrats will bring them back into the circle, that they'll be part of that clique. And they'll be first among the vassals of the American Empire.
And we could go on a whole. Actually, on my show earlier today, I talked about there's plenty of parasites on the leadership of the Europeans as well. So that's not a good place to go for that. But in any case, listen, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but this is a real big issue about not just what's going on in Nigeria, but this larger issue of financialization, as I think you termed it, the militarization of our foreign policy, and just the take kind of mentality. All these things together are eroding our national power and foundation that one day, as you said, could be tested. And I'm not sure we'll be passing that test when it comes. But as always, we appreciate you shining a light on this stuff, and we're unintimidated and uncompromised to bring the truth, even when it's truth a lot of people don't want to hear, but we need to, because that's the only chance we have to actually avoid some of these worst outcomes. And that's why we highlight this stuff, not to be gloom and doom, but to show you there's risk if we don't change our ways, and there's still time to do some of that. We hope that happens, and we appreciate you showing exactly why.
All right. Thanks, Danny. Happy holidays, belated Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year to you, your family, to your mom, and to everyone watching.
Thanks. I appreciate that a lot, and I'm sure my mom does too. You've always been one of her favorites. Thank you very much for being with us today as well, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.